Next witness is Peter Ferrara, Ferrara, the Senior Fellow for Entitlement and Budget Policy at the Heartland Institute. He served in the White House Office of Policy Development under President Reagan and as Associate Deputy Attorney General of the United States under the first President Bush. Mr. Ferrara is a graduate of Harvard and Harvard Law School, and welcome to the Small Business Committee.
I press the button here. Mr. Graves, Ms. Velasquez, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify this afternoon, actually. I have sort of a macro view of the economy and as it affects small businesses and everyone else, actually. Even President Obama's budget projects that the Federal Government's gross Federal debt will soar to 100% of GDP by 2020. The Bank for International Settlements estimates that this gross debt will accelerate even faster, hitting 200% of GDP by 2022 and 300% by 2030. Under current policy, CBO projects that even the smaller national debt held by the public would rocket to 185% of GDP by 2035 and to 200% by 2037, twice as large as our entire economy. This national debt would explode further to unprecedented levels of 233% of GDP by 2040 and to 854% of GDP by 2080. What this means is that America is almost at the same disastrous level of debt as Greece, and on our current course, we will soon be there. Indeed, on our current course, we will rocket right through that level and well beyond. Now, most people do not know that soon after World War II, Federal spending as a percent of GDP has been fairly stabilized and has remained stable at around 20% of GDP until recently. Official U.S. government projections have shown for some time now that over the next 30 to 40 years, Federal spending as a percent of GDP will double to 40% or more. Financing that would ultimately require at least doubling every Federal tax. Add in continued state and local spending growing towards 15% of GDP, and government in America will consume more than half of the economy. In fact, it will be more than that because the economy will collapse under that burden, and the percent of spending as a percent of GDP would be even higher. This would fundamentally transform America into a static, low-growth, socialist European state. America's traditional world-leading prosperity and opportunity, the American dream, would be gone. And, of course, small businesses would be the first and chief victims of that economic future. But there is good news if we would open our minds and think anew. As I showed in detail in my recent book, America's Ticking Bankruptcy Bomb, by modernizing our old-fashioned tax and redistribution entitlement programs to rely instead on 21st century capital, labor, and insurance markets, we can achieve all the social goals of these entitlement programs far more effectively, actually serving seniors and the poor far better at just a fraction of the current cost of these programs. Such reforms would involve powerful market incentives driving the programs to contribute further to booming economic growth and prosperity rather than detracting from it. Ultimately, these reforms altogether would reduce Federal spending by half or more as a percent of GDP of what it would be otherwise, solving the long-term fiscal problem. Yet because these reforms would involve fundamental structural changes that actually serve the poor and seniors far better, rather than simple-minded benefit cuts, they would be politically feasible. Modernizing the programs to the remarkable benefit of the populations they serve, which the book shows is possible by harnessing markets and incentives to achieve the social goals of the programs far more effectively, is the political key to unlock the door to necessary entitlement reform. Exhibit A, the first example of this would be the 1996 welfare reform that reformed the old AFDC program. That program previously was based on a matching Federal funding formula. The more the state spent, the more the Federal Government would send to the state, basically paying the state to spend more. That formula was transformed into finite block grants. The Federal funds for the states were fixed by a formula, fixed finite amount. If the states spent more, the states had to spend it out of their own pocket. If the states reformed the program and spent less, they could keep the money. Under those incentives, we had remarkable results. Two-thirds got off the program within a couple years and went to work. They saved the taxpayers by 50% of what it would have cost otherwise after a period of about 10 years. Yet the poor gained. Their incomes are documented to increase by 25% because so many more of them were working. There are nearly 200 more Federal means-tested welfare programs. This same reform could be extended to each one of those. They are estimated to cost $10 trillion over the next 10 years. I estimate that extending those same reforms would save $4.1 trillion. See, again, the poor gain, the taxpayers gain as well. Another key example, personal accounts for Social Security. You would shift the spending, and it's an enormous reduction in Federal spending. You shift the spending from the public sector to the private sector. yet the seniors in the future would gain higher benefits rather than lower benefits because long-term market investment returns are so much higher than what Social Security can even promise, let alone what it could pay, which is based on no savings and investment at all, but just tax and redistribution. So again, seniors gain and the taxpayers gain because the tax burden, eventually you could expand those personal accounts to displace the payroll tax entirely, financing all the benefits that are financed by the payroll tax today through those personal accounts. So that's another example. Modern ISA programs serve seniors far better and solve the long-term fiscal problem. Same would apply to Obamacare, and I could go into that. Thank you very much.